Welcome back, everybody, to Dude and Little Dudes Reviews. My name is Alex, and not with me today is Roman. I'll be doing this review solo. That's right, pun intended. So let's just get on with the review. So what I wanted to do today was give a little bit of a different perspective of someone who actually attended the Solo: A Star Wars Story fan event. So yes, there was a fan event over at our local Harkins Theater. You paid basically about $20 to get in, 1 hour earlier than the release, which was about 7 o'clock local time for us. It was actually pretty good, not bad. You got like a Han Solo Star Wars poster. We also got a couple of the movie pins, which had a couple of quotes. But it was more than anything, the experience of it was a little underwhelming just for going into the fanfare event itself. But the movie itself was fantastic. So that's something I just wanted to share, I guess, as someone who actually attended this. Would I do it again for another future movie? Probably not. It's just for sake of actually going there for the experience, at least to do it one time. So what I also wanted to do is do a comparison with the Han Solo omnibus books that I remember reading way back in the day, and even some of the other Han Solo related stories. I mean, Han Solo, obviously, Star Wars in general has been all over the place, and Dark Horse comic books, even Marvel, and along with a lot of independent authors who actually got the approval to release their take on the Star Wars universe. The comic books themselves, even though they were titled as part of the mainstream movies, were a little bit different. They followed pretty much almost virtually the same storyline, but there's a few alterations in there, just kind of made it a little bit different. The script in it is a little bit different. They just added a few extra things. For example, there's that scene where Han and Leia are still in Hoth and they're kind of in the hallway, that awkward kiss moment kind of thing. Well, in this particular one in the comic books, you can see like a Wampa all of a sudden just appears, breaks through one of the glacier walls. But either way, I mean, like I said, the stories themselves for the Han Solo background, the story that you get from him it follows the continuity of what the movie was portraying as well, where he basically grew up, from the rough streets, basically from Corellia, the planet that was known for making a lot of the ships and the very fast ones. You got the Millennium Falcon, you got the Corellian cruisers. So a lot of where the movie, references the comic books has those places too, which is kind of nice. In the movie, I like how they even referenced the Corellian Corvette flying off the planet. It was kind of cool to see that. It almost seems like the Corellia was just like the Detroit of the universe, where all the ships are made. So it's kind of fun to see that. So since I'm kind of doing a very quick light review, not so much really in-depth thing, I just wanted to share some perspective and tie-ins that I've caught in from watching the movie, and somebody who growing up with the comic books and reading the actual books themselves. I wanted to point out a few things. So in the comic books, it was very interesting because there was some characters in the Solo Star Wars movie that I almost felt like they could have played a role in the comics as well, or a very close comparison. One of them, of course, being Han Solo's old girlfriend. The old girlfriend, of course, being Salazar, for any of you guys who were familiar with the comic books, who eventually hooks up with Shug Ninks, and them two end up helping Han and Leia in the future in the Dark Horse comic books. But what hit me the most was simply the fact that Val, who is played by Thandie Newton, Val, of course, being Tobias Beckett, that character's girlfriend or fiance, whatever you want to call it. They were going to settle after the job was done. But it was so funny how the characteristics were so similar, because even after Sala had broken up with Han, it seemed like she was really bitter and kind of negative towards him. And Val had that same kind of feeling towards Han, even though in the movie they weren't really together. Obviously, Val was with Tobias, but I had that nerve struck that similarity and the characteristic and the portrayal, the personality of this person was very similar to the one in the comic books. So Han and Chewie's story, the way they met in the comic books, there's a lot of variations, keep in mind, because you got Marvel and Dark Horse and probably a couple other unnamed ones. But basically, Han Solo was an Imperial working as a pilot. He ends up going to Kessel. He sees the Wookiee enslavements, and he ends up freeing Chewie. So that, in a nutshell, was what happened. There's different alterations and variations of how they meet for the first time, but I liked how in the movie they kind of portrayed that as Han still being in the Imperial, just not a pilot, and not technically on Kessel, but Chewie was a prisoner of the Imperials, which kind of matched with the story that had been portrayed in the comic books and in the books. So it's kind of nice that they still kept to it. And I was really excited. A lot of people in the theater reacted very positively. Of course, as soon as they said, well, he's feed him to the beast, we all knew right away, oh, this is Chewie and Han's moment. So this is a lot of fun. And I just love how them two just like wrestled with each other for a good minute. And considering Han being human and Chewie's supposed to be this, freakishly strong creature, I'm surprised Han lasted as long as he did, but thank goodness he spoke Wookiee, so I think that's what really saved him. And for those of you who are very critical about the whole language thing, I mean, in the comics and even especially in the books, they hinted a lot towards Han being a linguist because he grew up in the streets of Corellia. It's so different. There were so many poor people, all different classes, different refugee alien races. Of course, this kind of made sense where Han had to learn how to survive on the street, so he had to learn a lot of languages. So that actually does make a lot of sense for those of you guys who are just like, how does he speak Wookiee all of a sudden? No, it does happen because of his upbringing forced him to learn other languages. I wanted to go back and touch on real quick. I mentioned the books already. So one thing I wanted to mention about the Han Solo omnibus and give you guys a little bit of background from, again, I'm just sharing what I remembered and I wanted to tie it into this movie. Very similar to it in the books, he actually had a girlfriend named Bria, and it was very interesting how the story actually starts off with Bria and Han being young and knowing each other. And they kind of tied this in with this movie, of course, with Kira. So it's a little bit of a different person, but same relationship. He had a relationship with a young girl. They were trying to get off planet. They both were poor, kind of growing up in the streets, working for what they call portions, which is basically food. But of course, it kind of ties into the whole universe again, them working and just surviving and trying to get little credits here and there as much as they can. So either way, I mean, you do see Han Solo or read about Han Solo being a scammer, scam artist trying to rip off certain things, but he wasn't necessarily a bad guy trying to rip off good people. He was literally just trying to work the system as much as he can to kind of take what he could before giving it to the people who were really taking advantage of him. So again, interesting tie into the movie and the books, same kind of story concept where Han is trying to work his way to get off planet with Kira in the movie and with Bria in the books. In the book series, they kind of get involved with the substance known as glitterstim, which is very, very valuable. It was basically a hallucinogenic drug made from spice, which is what you're referring to as Han Solo was a carrier of spice, that basically created temporary psychic abilities. Of course, in the movie version, it's a little bit different. In the movie, the valuable resource is known as coaxium, which is basically the hyperfuel. And I kind of like that they explain that and the intro scenes before you get into the actual movie itself, just like they normally do. Thank goodness they didn't rant on about some taxation thing like we all know. A certain movie that we don't want to make mention of. But anyways, going into this one, coaxium was one of those, this is the main target of the movie, right? This is what's valuable. This is what Han needs in order to, make the money that he needs to make to get his ship, to have the freedom that he wants, the freedom that he's seeking, and of course, run away with Kira. Quick reference I wanted to make also, coaxium, it was kind of funny because most people don't really understand that the glitterstim that was what was basically the valuable commodity in the books and in the comic books. It makes total sense that for a movie, especially if you're trying to hit up a new generation, you want to change a little bit, only because, if you really think about it, technically Han was a drug runner, so because the drugs that he was running was the glitterstim, and in the movie it was a lot better. Of course, it was just a hyper fuel that was very volatile, and also very valuable and just dangerous to process, but very well worth the risks if you can get away with it. So very interesting tie-in how they just decided to go to hyperfuel. So we talked a little bit about Han Solo and his background according to the comics and the books. I'm not going to get too detailed into the actor, of course, Eldon Ehrenreich, who played Han Solo. I personally thought he did a fantastic job portraying it. Just remembering the interviews from back in the day, George Lucas actually pulled off some actors that weren't necessarily A-listed actors. I mean, these were new actors that had a lot of good talent, or maybe had a little bit of credibility, and had some. They saw a lot of talent in them. So I like the fact that they pulled somebody that I wasn't even 100% familiar with, but it was nice to see him enter into this big mainstream movie. Of course, you've got Emilia Clarke, who played Kira. Interesting thing about the character Kira, most people didn't quite catch this, but she makes reference at the very end. So again, here's the big spoiler thing when she gets in combat mode, and I think there's like a mention of this. One of my buddies pointed this out, that she studied it's a Teres Kasi, which is kind of funny because that's actually a PlayStation game. The Star Wars Masters of Terrakasi is what I was referring to. Not very popular. A lot of people didn't like it. It was that pixie, pixelated polygon, kind of painful on the eyes to watch, but it was kind of like a fun, fighting game. If any of you guys have ever seen it or tried it. But either way, I kind of like how they make mention of that when she was fighting. Of course, we're also introduced to a whole bunch of new characters. Moloch, who's shown here. Of course, they had some other ones, Rio Durant and, the gamblers over at the Droid Fight Club. Some of these I was very impressed that they decided to do some puppetry for some of the characters. Some of them were, of course, CGI. But again, I like how they kind of brought back some of that puppetry as well, mixed in, just to kind of give it that authentic Star Wars look. And of course, we got Chewbacca, played by Finnish actor Johannes Sotamo. Really interesting to see that, not only was he a basketball player, so he had the physique for it, but also the fact that he reached out to Peter Mayhew, who played the original Chewbacca, and kind of got his embodiment and ideas of how to portray Chewbacca as a character. Again, speaking of new characters, we're also introduced to Tobias Beckett, played by Woody Harrelson. So really awesome to see this really famous and well-skilled gunslinger / outlaw, become a mentor for Han, and being the background cause of Han being Han. So I already made mention of Val here, played by Thandie Newton. I would say that the biggest influence she had was the don't trust anybody, influence for Han Solo. Of course, it was Tobias Beckett that basically told Han that, but you could see that she physically did it and was telling Tobias not to bring him on board or join the crew. Another alien character, which I actually felt a little bit more of an emotional tie to just because he was so funny and charismatic, was Rio Durant, the four-armed pilot smuggler, the guy who was also in the crew. But he basically defended and stood up for Han and wanted to give him a shot to join the crew. So really liked his character there and how he tied into the whole story. Here we've got Dryden Voss, played by Paul Bettany. You'll notice here in the background the Mandalorian armor, which is really cool. One thing I'll say about this real quick about the villains in these movies, a lot of people, YouTubers, were kind of complaining that, hey, there is no villain. It was kind of lacking. Realistically, if you're really open to the mindset and paying attention to what was going on in the character development, if you really think about it, what does Han Solo consider himself? He says that he's an outlaw, right? So to an outlaw, who's the enemy? It's everyone. And if you really think about that, I mean, it's everyone. It's your friends. It's the people you work with, or it could be the people that you work with. So it's so hard to find that trust. And the way he grew up is that everyone was after him or had some sort of scam going on against him, or trying to use him one way or another. So you have to think that on Han Solo's world, everyone was the enemy. And that's why it was so hard for him to bring people in. That's why that relationship between him and Chewie was so special and was so dynamic, that he had this trust with his Wookiee, and Chewie, just being a loyal companion, was the one and only person Han could really tie himself to and with for the rest of his life. So really interesting to see that spin on, if you're looking for a centralized enemy, there was none. It was everybody. It's everything, everybody. You have to just be suspicious of everything. We, of course, got our Lando, of course, who was introduced as this suave, debonair, charming person, played by Donald Glover, which I thought he did a fantastic job at portraying Lando Calrissian. I love the fact that these two characters, how they met through the Sabacc game, how Han Solo, of course, lost everything because Lando had cheated. Now, going back here, I'm going to go back and reference the book series. There's a section in the books, and this is years after Lando and Han had already met, but they play another Sabacc game, and they made reference that it was Lando who suspected of Han Solo cheating the first time to win the Millennium Falcon. So I really thought that was hilarious that this time around, the tie-in is that Lando was deliberately, I mean, we saw it as an audience, he was the cheater. And then Lando does this, his infamous little grip lock or whatever that you see in Empire Strikes Back, the little moment when it seems like they're about to attack each other, but they don't. That was the moment when Han Solo just snags the card from his sleeve shirt. So again, really awesome. Great job, for Donald Glover playing and portraying Lando Calrissian. I did really enjoy, of course, L3, technically L337, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I love the fact that they kind of brought in a feminist slash robotist, if you want to call that. Almost remind me of the fembots from, if you guys ever watched Futurama, you'll know what I'm talking about. Always fighting for the equal rights and this and that. So it's kind of an awesome spin-off to see that and how she liberates and frees and causes this distraction over on Kessel. But I really love this character. More than anything, it brought this character L3 brought life to the Millennium Falcon. As you guys know, you've seen the integration when L3 dies, they upload her nav system and kind of like her memory banks and stuff like that to the Falcon itself. And you never really think about that when you watch the original movies. You just think the Falcon's a ship. And, a lot of, even in our time, in reality, we refer to as vessels and ships as a she, right? In the Star Wars universe, the same thing too. Lando always referred to her as a woman, as a female, as a her. And it's just so funny that they literally did that and brought that to life with L3's character. So I don't want to get into extreme detail with every single character on the roster for the movie, but Enfys Nest is a honorable mention I just wanted to point out, simply for the fact that it seems like the theme for a lot of the Star Wars movies is a piece or group of people, piece of the galaxy, I guess if you want to say, a certain corner of the universe where you start to see the rebellion form. So Enfys Nest is one of that, and that introduction you didn't quite expect because she seemed like she was that pirate villain, marauder type character that didn't really care about anything except wanting to kill the characters. But again, really nice to see the tie-in. Of course, I have to make an honorable mention here for Darth Maul, of course, who makes an appearance at the very end. That was definitely a shock. A lot of people in the theater, the reaction was like, wait a second, he's already dead, Of course, we go into the animated series and the comic books, which introduced us to the Darth Maul who was cut in half but turned into half cyborg. So basically, his upper half is alive, the lower half isn't. This is a tie-in to one of the original PC games. In 1997, Star Wars Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 introduced us to Maw, one of the major antagonists in the game who was a former Jedi fallen to the dark side. His legs were severed in an attempt to capture another story character, Jedi Master Q-Ran, hence now maneuvers the upper half of his body on a life-supportive hover disc. I only made mention of this here as a fun fact since it was the first time I've seen the concept of a half-cut character coming back to life. There are so many tie-ins and fantastic theories about the Solo a Star Wars story movie, and I have to say, despite the criticisms, I really did enjoy the film. Considering that there have been so many books and comics that go into hours and hours of the origin storyline, we have to remember that unlike the Marvel Cinematic Universe that was based from comic books, Star Wars originated from film, which is where the books and comics followed after. Taking the film for what it is, it gave a lot of good nods to those of us that read the books or comics, or like myself, who also wanted to listen to a good night story on tape. One major film nod from the original Star Wars movie A New Hope, the much controversial Solo versus Greedo debate of who shot first. The controversy where people criticized Han for being a cold-blooded murderer since he shot Greedo instantly during conversation, was later edited to portray Han as defending himself in retaliation, whereas in this new movie there is no debate during Han versus Beckett, the shootout, which I thought was a fantastic in-your-face to the conservatists that pressured studio executives. Yeah, Han is the scoundrel we all knew him to be and just gotta love. All in all, I'm so glad this film brought back our favorite characters formerly played by some legendary actors. It brought familiarity as well as some new insight into the Star Wars universe. I would definitely recommend adding this to your Star Wars library collection. We hope you enjoyed this alternate perspective review from yet another Star Wars fan. There are so many more things we could discuss and share, so please comment down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe as well, as this definitely helps us stay motivated to bring you more content in the future. I'll leave you with some solo words of wisdom. Never tell me the odds. This is Alex signing out.